This is part 2 of a study on the elect of God, originally recorded on Blog Talk Radio over the internet, edited, refined, and added to as needed. Okay, now we're going to go to Numbers chapter 3. Okay, Numbers chapter 3, and we're going to start in verse 11. Because if you can understand this picture, then you're going to be able to understand the picture that God gives us in the New Testament as well. Because it's all types and shadows. What he did with the Israelites then, he does with his children that come to him in the Spirit. Okay, Numbers 3, verse 11 says, "And the Lord spake unto Moses, saying, And I, behold, I have taken the Levites from among the children of Israel instead of all the firstborn that openeth the matrix." Here's a trade that God made. He took the Levites and they became priests to him. He exchanged them for all the firstborn because he wanted a particular tribe set aside for his glory to minister to him. And those are the ones that ended up going into the tabernacle and doing service for the Lord. It says, "And I, behold, I have taken the Levites from among the children of Israel instead of all the firstborn that openeth the matrix among the children of Israel. Therefore the Levites shall be mine." Remember before he said that the firstborn were his. Well, what he does with us, he takes us, those that he has chosen, and he sets us as his kings and priests to rule and reign with him. And that's the spiritual picture of it. Okay, verse 13 says, "Because all the firstborn are mine, for on the day that I smote all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, I hallowed unto me all the firstborn in Israel." Notice he hallowed them to himself. It says, "I hallowed unto me all the firstborn in Israel, both man and beast. Mine shall they be. I am the Lord." Okay, there's something else that we need to understand here. There is a group of people that the Lord saves alive when death should have taken us. God has kept alive, and those are the ones that he goes to them and shows them that they should have died. And because his blood, his sacrifice, kept them alive beyond any hope of them being alive, he chooses them and sets them apart also. And so if you have been kept alive beyond any hope of the capabilities of man keeping you alive, it was for a reason. And sooner or later, God is probably going to call on you to fulfill his will. What he does with us is he claims ownership. Because he's the one that kept us alive when death should have taken us, he will eventually claim ownership. And that's kind of a type and shadow that fits along in here as well. Now let's go to Colossians chapter 1. You know, when God does show us something like that, we know that we should have died. And so we know that it's only his breath that is actually keeping us alive. And when he claims us in that way, we know we don't have any ownership to our life. We know that we're on borrowed time, that we should have actually died at that point. And the Lord actually did that with me. He showed me several times where I was supposed to have died. And if it hadn't been for him keeping me alive, I wouldn't have this life right now anyways. And he basically told me he owned me. And from that point on, just like when he claimed the firstborn, they didn't argue about it. They just knew. They knew that they belonged to him and that he had a particular purpose for them. And so there's many, many people out there today that he has done that with, but he hasn't shown it to them yet. And there will be a time where he's going to show them, hey, your life belongs to me. It does not belong to you, and you have a job to do. And he will show us what we're supposed to be doing. And it matches the picture with the firstborn and the ones that he calls to minister to him and be priests to him. And they also are ones that offer sacrifices. They lift up the Lord for that sacrifice for others as well. Because the offering that was made in the tabernacle, there was a priest that offered up that offering. Well, Jesus Christ is the offering. And so we just basically let other people know about the offering that he made for their souls. And that's what priests do. Praise God. And we minister to the Lord, and they're the ones that are hallowed for that particular purpose in order to bring forth his sacrifice to others, to show them that sacrifice. Okay, we're going to go to Colossians chapter 1, and we're going to start in verse 12. That's Colossians 1, verse 12. It says, giving thanks unto the Father, which hath made us meet to be partakers of the inheritance of the saints in light. Okay, notice here it's talking about being partakers. Okay, well, the priests were partakers of the sacrifices that they offered. They ate of the sacrifices. Well, we consume the flesh of Jesus Christ, which is his word. Okay, we are partaking of the sacrifices, just like the Israelites had to eat the flesh of the lamb and put the blood on the doorpost. Well, the blood comes on our heart now because that's where the seed gets planted, the seed of the word. And we are partakers as we consume that word. Okay, it says, giving thanks unto the Father, which hath made us meet to be partakers of the inheritance of the saints in light. We become inheritors of the kingdom through Jesus Christ. He gives us part of his inheritance. He divides his inheritance with the measure of the gift of Christ that we each have. Okay, so it says, partakers of the inheritance. He's the one that got the inheritance from the Father. Then he shed forth part of his inheritance to the earth, to those that would be serving him. Okay, it says, made us meet to be partakers of the inheritance of the saints in light, who hath delivered us from the power of darkness. That's out of that house of bondage. Just like the Israelites was brought out of the house of bondage, out of the bondage of Egypt, so that they could serve the living God. It's the same picture all over again. And it says, who hath delivered us from the power of darkness, and hath translated us into the kingdom of his dear Son. It says, in whom we have redemption through his blood. There's the redeeming power of that sacrificed lamb. Remember, the blood is what kept them alive also when they came out of Egypt. It kept those firstborn alive and consuming the lamb. It says, in whom we have redemption through his blood, even the forgiveness of sins, who is the image of the invisible God. Now, this is Jesus Christ that's talking about, who is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of every creature. Okay, Jesus is the firstborn of God, and he's the firstborn of every creature. That's the spiritual creatures, okay? And we become part of him through his sacrifice. Okay, it says, for by him were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible. Through the word of God, everything was created, visible and invisible. That's the angels, all of it. Okay, it says, for by him were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions. Notice even the throne itself was created through him and by him. It says whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers. All things were created by him and for him. That is the purpose of everything that was created, was in service to him. It was all created for Jesus Christ and by him. It says, and he is before all things, and by him all things consist. Remember, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He's the one that created everything. The spoken word is what brought light into the world to begin with. So when the word was spoken, light came out from within God. When God said, let there be light, the word is the light that he spoke. Because the sun, moon, and stars had not been created yet until I think it was the third day. Well, the light was there, the spiritual light was there before the sun, moon, and stars were ever there. When God spoke, let there be light, the word he spoke, the word is a lamp unto my feet and a light unto my path. So those very words is the light, and Jesus is that light that he sent into the world to bring us out of the darkness. Okay, so it all fits together. Okay, let's go back to this. And he is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, watch this, the firstborn from the dead. And we become part of that firstborn through him, through his blood. And remember, he claimed the firstborn that were saved by the blood as his own. Okay, that's the same type and shadow of what happened in Egypt. He claimed the firstborn, and we become part of the firstborn as we become part of his body. Okay, it says, and he is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead. Remember, we come out of the bondage of death because he has the keys to hell and death. He saves us from death, just like he saved the firstborn, the Israelites that were in Egypt, from the death angel passing over. Well, he saves us from death as well. And that's why he said those that were supposed to have died, he's already claimed them for himself. He saved them from death. And eventually, their jobs are going to be made known to them. And they're going to have work to do for him. And just like he called the firstborn and said that they were his, he's going to do the same thing with those that he has saved from death. Okay, it says, and he is the head of the body, the church, who is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in all things he might have the preeminence. For it pleased the Father that in him should all fullness dwell. and having made peace through the blood of his cross, by him to reconcile all things unto himself. By him, I say, whether they be things in earth or things in heaven. And it was all through the blood that he shed. Those of us that would have been his enemies, he made peace through that blood so that we could actually become part of him instead of his enemy. It says, and having made peace through the blood of his cross, by him to reconcile all things unto himself. Notice it's all things. It says, by him I say, whether they be things in earth or things in heaven. The price was paid to reconcile all things back to himself. Verse 21, and you that were sometime alienated and enemies in your mind by wicked works. That's what separates us from God, is our wicked works. It separates us from him because we are the house of the wicked while we're doing wicked works. But when we come to the knowledge of the truth, we put away the wickedness and come to Christ and let him lead us instead. It says, and you that were sometime alienated and enemies in your mind by wicked works, yet now hath he reconciled. Look what it says here. Remember we talked about the flesh of the lamb that the Israelites had to consume? Okay, we're going to see that picture again. And they had to put the blood. They had to apply the blood. And they had to consume the flesh. Well, here you're going to see it again. It says, yet now hath he reconciled in the body of his flesh through death. His flesh paid the price. It says, to present you holy and unblameable and unreprovable in his sight. But look at what this says. A lot of people will say that they have that. They'll say that they are unblameable and unreprovable in his sight, but they forget about the next verse. It says, if ye continue in the faith. So it's to present you holy and unblameable and unreprovable in his sight, if ye continue in the faith, grounded and settled, and not just that one thing, but here's some more, and be not moved away from the hope of the gospel. Okay, it's not just being grounded in the faith and settled, but also we can't allow ourselves to be moved away from the hope of the gospel. We need to abide in him and allow him to abide in us at all times. Okay, it says, if ye continue in the faith, grounded and settled, and be not moved away from the hope of the gospel, which ye have heard, and which was preached to every creature which is under heaven, whereof I, Paul, am made a minister. So we have to continue abiding in him. Because, for example, if you stop feeding a baby that is growing, that baby's going to die. So if we don't continue receiving the nourishment from God, eventually that spirit of death is going to take us back over again. We have to have the life flowing through us and continue that life flow in order to stay alive. If we refuse the flow of the waters of life, eventually we're going to die. That spirit of death is going to replace that life, and we'll get back into sin again. And that's why we see people that start out growing in God, and all the cares of the world and the deceitfulness of riches and those things like that get a hold of them again, and they stop reading the Word. They stop abiding in the Lord, and eventually they get taken back over again by the wickedness. And so it's so important to remain in Him and keep walking in His Spirit. And there's so many scriptures that talk about abiding in Him. This will be continued in part 3 of the study on the elect of God.